So, what is the most disturbing piece of lost media that you've come across? Well, there's a lot you could probably choose from, and a lot are much too gruesome and dark to even mention here on this channel. Because some pieces of lost media come from real life tragic events, but I don't really like to cover stuff like that. I personally like to look at pieces of media that were created usually for the purpose of entertainment in some way, that ended up becoming lost. Not only because it's fascinating to think about what that piece of lost media could be, or why it was lost in the first place, but also how we could potentially find it in the future. However, there's this one piece of lost media, this one disturbing short film that really caught my eye. Mostly because not only is it lost, but also we just really have no idea what it even is. And that film is called Game in the Sand. Like I said, one of the most fascinating parts about this film is that we don't really know much about the film itself at all. We only know certain things that we've heard from the director of the film, who you might recognize as the world-renowned director Werner Herzog. But one of the things we do know is that back then he wasn't nearly as famous. In fact, this was only his second film that he had made, all the way back in 1964. So what makes it so disturbing? Well, by Herzog's own account, we know that the shooting got, quote, out of hand, but what that means is up to just theories and speculation. Although we do know what was filmed, allegedly. Spiel im Sand, or Game in the Sand, was a short film with 4 children playing on a beach, along with a rooster and a cardboard box. Sounds simple enough, right? Nothing really disturbing to that. What could go wrong? Well, apparently at some point during filming, we know that the rooster was apparently buried up to its neck in the sand. However, that's all we know. Everything beyond that, including what made Herzog completely drop the project and even consider destroying the negatives, that's all unknown to this day. And he has never revealed what was really filmed that day. Now, besides that very brief description of the film, the only other information we have on the film is that it was filmed apparently in black and white and ran for about 14 minutes, with the project being written and directed by, of course, Werner Herzog. However, there were 2 other people involved in the production, besides the children who were never identified. Those other 2 were Jamie Pacheco, who was responsible for the cinematography, and Uwe Bradner, who did the music for the short film. According to IMDb, Jamie Pacheco is only credited as a cinematographer working on projects in the 1960s and early 70s, having worked also on Herzog's first short film, Heracles, in 1962. However, after 1970, he has no new credits to his name. Uwe Bradner, on the other hand, is credited on working on many German films throughout the years, although he would eventually pass away at the age of 77 in 2018. Meaning besides the children, whose identities remain unknown to this day, Herzog is the only known living member from the production. And if you don't know anything about Werner, well, he is quite the interesting character. And through his other works, there may be some hints as to what could have gone on in the film. Now, Herzog is no stranger to accidents and disasters happening on his movie sets. In fact, many strange incidents have occurred while creating his films. One such film was called Even Dwarves Started Small, which Herzog would later compare to Game in the Sand in terms of its strange circumstances and incidents that would occur on set. One of these scenes he was referring to was a scene in the film where young piglets were actually filmed suckling their dead mother. But that's not all. Also, there was an accident in which, when filming one of the dwarf characters' scenes, an actor was run over by a van, although he was miraculously uninjured by the event. Sometime later in production, that same actor also accidentally caught on fire during a flower burning scene. And luckily, he only suffered minor injuries before the fire was put out, but because of these 2 incidents, Herzog promised the cast that if they finished filming without any more incidents on set, that he would jump into a cactus patch, which he ultimately did do. Yeah, this guy is kind of strange. And that's not all he's done. Apparently, he also even pulled out a gun on one of his actors, threatening to shoot him if he tried to leave set. Well, that actor was Klaus Kinski, who starred in a number of his films throughout the years, and the 2 were known to quarrel basically all the time. But their collaboration on the film, Fitzcarraldo, would end up being Herzog's most troubled production by far, and it would really show just how far he was willing to go to tell his stories. First of all, before the set was even complete, there were many injuries trying to get a steamship, which was the centerpiece of the film, to be set up on a steep hill. Not only that, but Kinski wasn't originally going to even play the leading role. That was going to be Justin Robards, although he became extremely sick about halfway through production, and so Kinski came on. But they were said to still fight all the time, so much that apparently one of the extras working on the film actually offered to kill Kinski for Herzog, which he did decline. However, the worst of it didn't really affect them so much, but rather the native extras that were working on the film, where there were a lot of injuries and even deaths that occurred. One of the most shocking of these incidents was when a Peruvian logger working on set was bitten by a poisonous snake, and rather than hope that he could be saved in time, made the decision to cut off his own foot with a chainsaw. Yeah, some crazy stuff has happened during Herzog's productions. And the reason I described all of these incidents is because you've got to think, how could he still continue production on these films where there were life-threatening injuries, disturbing animal scenes that were left in the final cut, as well as even on-set deaths? Even with all of this, he was still so committed to making these movies that he would move forward regardless of the hurdle. However, with Game in the Sand, something happened. Something we don't understand that was so disturbing he not only decided to cancel the project, but also only let a couple of people see the film before saying that he would eventually destroy the negatives before he died. So it really just makes you wonder, what really happened? But there is one more interesting thing about Werner that I haven't yet mentioned, and it's something that not a lot of people might have noticed about him, but through my research I found quite fascinating about the man. So for some reason, Werner Herzog has some sort of fear and hatred for chickens. Let me explain. So remember when I said Herzog compared his film Even Dwarves Started Small and the incidents that occurred there with whatever happened with Game in the Sand? Well, I left out one interesting scene that he mentioned. A scene in which chickens would cannibalize each other on film. Yes, that happened, and they did film it. Now, I know this sounds disturbing enough, right? But along with the other strange and disturbing things that have occurred while making his films, it's really just a drop in the ocean, right? Well, strangely, there are a lot of weird instances of chickens in Herzog's films, such as the famous scene from the movie Strozek, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, where in a weird twist, the film ends showing a chicken dance for a full minute and 30 seconds. A couple of strange sequences with chickens doesn't mean much, right? Well, that was until Werner said this in an interview.
The enormity of their flat brain, the enormity of their stupidity is just overwhelming. You have to do yourself a favor when you're out in the countryside and you see chicken. Try to look a chicken in the eye with great intensity, and the intensity of stupidity that is looking back at you is just amazing. By the way, it's very easy to hypnotize a chicken. They're very prone to hypnosis, and in one or two films I've actually shown that.
This isn't the only time he has referenced his fear of chickens either. On many occasions, he's talked about it, even stating that the scene of the dancing chicken in Strozek might be the best he's ever filmed. One of the most interesting statements he's made about chickens, though, is, quote, "Look into the eyes of a chicken, and you will see real stupidity. It's a kind of bottomless stupidity, a fiendish stupidity. They are the most horrifying, cannibalistic, and nightmarish creatures in the world." Now, could this be related to something he saw that made him afraid of chickens? I think so. But this doesn't sound as much like something that happened in Game in the Sand, but rather sounds like a reference to what he saw when filming Even Dwarves Started Small. So is that the origin of his chicken fear? Possibly. But there is another interesting detail, which is that in almost all of these instances of him talking about chickens, he is obsessed with the quote, stupidity of chickens, saying multiple times whenever he talks about it that he can't stand how stupid they are, especially with the way that they look at you, even saying that it was, quote, overwhelming. He would even say in a 2021 interview that they frightened him. But the most interesting fact he revealed during this interview is that on multiple occasions, For his films, he was able to hypnotize chickens and said it was incredibly easy to do so, even going on to describe the process, which is how they ended up having the chicken in Strozek dance for over a minute. Now that leaves a lot to speculate on. First of all, does that mean hypnosis was used on the chickens in the 1970s with Even Dwarves Started Small? And was this technique also used with Game in the Sand? It's definitely possible, which is a very scary thought to say the least. But now that we know all about the eccentric man who created the film itself, what do we think happened 57 years ago in Game in the Sand? Well, all we have to go on now are theories. So let's look into a couple of these. The first and most likely theory that is surmised by most people is that while shooting the scene in which the rooster was buried up to its neck in the sand, the rooster most likely suffocated to death because of a compact burial in the sand which would not allow his lungs to fully expand, which could have potentially been caught on film. And instead of helping the rooster breathe and get out of the sand, Herzog most likely continued filming, as well as seeing the children's reaction to seeing a living creature slowly suffocate and eventually take its last breath. Which would probably be a disturbing and traumatizing thing to witness, especially since it may have actually been the children who buried the rooster. A lot of people favor this theory because it works in conjunction with Herzog's reference of the film getting, quote, out of hand. So most likely the burial in the sand, as well as whatever happened that made the film get cancelled, are probably related. And so it would make a lot of sense that the chicken would suffocate after being buried, because similar cases have happened, to humans even. So it's definitely one of the most likely outcomes. However, we've got to remember that Herzog has witnessed people getting severely injured on set, saw chickens cannibalizing each other, and even saw people die while making his films. And yet still, those films were made. So could this experience really have been that bad that he couldn't continue on, especially compared to what would happen later on in his career? Well, of course, we can't really know unless Herzog ever comes forward with either the film or what really happened. But in my opinion, I think this is the most likely outcome, because this was only Herzog's second film, and he was only 22 at the time. So all that crazy stuff that happened later on in his career, he hadn't seen anything like that yet. So maybe this really was traumatic for him at the time, especially knowing he might have made the children do this horrible thing to the chicken. However, there are other theories about what happened. One of the other major theories is that nothing actually crazy happened in the film at all. In fact, it might not even exist at all. And while this may be less exciting, it actually sounds kind of plausible. I mean, think about it. The only person with information regarding the film who's revealed its existence, and the only one who is known to have an actual copy of the film, is Werner himself. So all we have to go on is his word. And the film may or may not have actually been made, but regardless, maybe it was. But it wasn't interesting enough, and maybe he wanted to generate excitement and intrigue about the film. So the entire plot with the rooster and its head being buried in the sand, maybe that was completely fabricated. This is one of the most common theories because Herzog in the past has embellished details, and has said and done many controversial things, which some people may attribute to Herzog trying to get people to pay attention to his exploits. Which could very well be true, and this short film could simply be one of those attempts. One of the more dark theories, though, is that the chicken may have actually done something to the children instead of the other way around. I'm sure at one point in your life you've probably heard the term cockfighting, and surprisingly, at least to me, cockfighting, aka chicken fighting, is a huge thing in many countries, and according to Vice Asia, it's a $1 billion industry, which is absolutely wild. And yes, they literally do fight each other in places like the Dominican Republic and the Philippines, with people betting on the winner, in a fashion not very different to dogfighting. And so we don't know where Game in the Sand was filmed, but the theory goes that maybe the rooster actually attacked the children, injuring them on camera, while Herzog filmed the whole thing. I mean, they have extremely sharp beaks, and they can be very aggressive in certain situations, or especially if they're trained to do so. Although there is an even more disturbing theory that has been proposed about the film. Some people believe that in some way, the children in the film tortured and eventually killed the rooster for 14 minutes on camera, either by Herzog's own command or of their own volition, which may be why Herzog was so disturbed and never revealed who the children in the film were. And as to why it was buried up to its neck in the sand, Well, some think that the children may have been trying to bury the rooster alive, while some have said that maybe they buried the rooster to its neck before kicking the rooster's head until it eventually died. Of course, all of this is just speculation and theories. We have no way of knowing what really went down that day, nor do we know why Herzog refuses to show the footage. All we can hope for is that one day he eventually releases it, or at least tells us what happened in game in the sand.